First stall, chapter 11. That day after school, as Vince, Joe, and I were walking Fred home, I heard someone shouting for help. It was coming from the alley that ran behind the house across from the school. There were actually a few voices yelling for help. Hear that? I asked as I veered off toward the alley. Yeah, Mac, but be careful, Fred said. We approached the alley with great caution, but there was no need to. We saw them almost immediately. It was most of my hired muscle. Four of my bullies all sat next to each other right in the middle of the alley, and two others stood nearby. We jogged over to them, and I swore under my breath when I was close enough to see them clearly. Little Paul the Hut, Kevin, and I bully were all tied up on the ground. Some were crying. Only Snapper and Prep School were not bound, but they still looked pretty shaken. They were trying to untie the others unsuccessfully. I knew immediately what had happened. I had ordered to hit on Staples' what hitman, so he responded by ordering a hit on my hitmen. Help us, Mac, Kevin said. Kevin was a seventh grader, a real tough kid, actually, and now his eyes were red from crying. We freed the four of them, and they were all rubbing their wrists and tried to soothe their injured pride. These were the kings of the school, and they had just been manhandled and made fools of. They weren't even angry. They all looked more scared than anything else. I addressed the Hut, as he seemed to be the only one who could talk without crying or stumbling over a busted lip. How did this happen? I asked. They were just there waiting for us, the Hut said. Who? It was a bunch of high schoolers and Justin Johnson. I was on my way home when these two high school kids grabbed me and forced me here. And then, when I got here, they tied me up and they brought everybody else here too. There were like four or five high school kids and Justin and his friend Mitch. They like punched us and kicked us, and we tried to get free and fight back, but we couldn't. The only one who even got a hit on one of them was Snapper. She bit one of them in the ear because they refused to fight her due to her being a girl and all. The Hut practically choked on his panic. They said to give you a message too. What? They said, we're all out of commission. They also said that you were next. They said that you're a dead man for not giving up Fred and for what you did today. I kept silent and tried to look calm. If I showed my fear, then we'd be doomed. People always turned to me for help, and if I was too scared to help them, then, well, I told you Staples was bad, Fred said with wide eyes. Oops. I'm sorry, Mac, but I'm out. I quit. I don't care much for how much money you give me, the Hut said. The other bullies agreed. We tried to convince them otherwise, but in the end, all six of them quit right then and there, which was probably for the better. I had gotten them hurt already. If they kept working for me, who knows what would happen to them? I needed to deal with this myself. I couldn't risk any more innocent kids getting hurt. Compared to Staples, even the bullies were innocent. We were careful the rest of the way home, but there was no sign of trouble. Someone was obviously toying with me, stabbing me in the back, selling me up the river, double crossing me, two timing me, or whatever else you want to call it. Someone was feeding Staples inside information. He just knew too much. That night, after I convinced my dad that I was finished with my homework, I went over to Vince's house to discuss plan to oust the rat. As much as much as going to Vince's that at night creeped me out to the proximity to the creek, I still tried to go over there once in a while, so I didn't feel bad about where he lived. We sat at his bedroom and played video games while we talked. I loved his room because it was covered with Cubs stuff, posters, a framed autographed jersey that we had bought a few years ago with our profits, banners, baseball cards. He even had a Cubs sheet on his bed. He had one amazing poster that was like the panoramic shot of Wrigley Field. You could never go wrong brainstorming under a gaze of so much Cub stuff. Staples clearly has an informant, someone close to our operation, I said. Given the exchange Joe and I saw between Brady and Jackie Boy earlier, I think it's pretty obvious who the number one suspect is. Brady likes owes Staples a bunch of money and is now spying on us to help repay it. Vince nodded, but Joe seemed less certain. I'd be careful jumping to conclusions, Mac. It could just be a coincidence. You really shouldn't assume anything. We need to be sure before we do anything drastic, Joe said. Joe's right, Mac, Vince said. How do we know Brady wasn't arguing on our behalf? Maybe they're arguing about Jackie Boy taking bets. Plus, we can't forget Nubby, Great White, and Kitten as suspects. I nodded. They were both right, of course. I was just so ready to wrap up this problem and move on to the bigger issue of taking down Staples himself that I was rushing myself and jumping to conclusions. I'd forgotten about the fact that the other three bullies weren't ambushed. Was that just a coincidence, or did it mean something else? Outside of Kitten, who I was pretty sure would never side with Staples, these weren't exactly the most trustworthy kids to have working for you. Yeah, those are good points. This whole thing is a much bigger mess than I thought, I said. One thing is clear, though. We need to figure out who the mole is before we move ahead with any other plans, because as long as Staples knows what we're up to, we've got no shot of winning. With the other, with that, the three of us came up with a way to verify just who the snitch might be. It wasn't something I wanted to do. In fact, what we do tomorrow would probably get us expelled immediately if we were caught, but it was a necessary risk. We need to know who was leaking information, and we need to know soon.